and I think we're going to be. It's called the PuppetTool, and this is one way that you can make kind of interesting animations. It's this little pin right here, and let's pretend this is a leg from the top of the hip down to the foot. So I would make a joint here, here, and here. It creates these points down here with we'll go over that in a second, but now I can grab these points and like bend the leg. Let's go. So when I moved those points, it created keyframes, and then you can like move it out here. So you can begin to like start animating, but obviously like there's a lot to be desired with this, right? So a couple things we're going to go over is one, like how to get like the puppet tool to work, but then how do you attach this leg to a torso, or how do you attach an arm to a torso? So we're going to be going over like, it's kind of going to be a review of parenting, how you parent an object to another object. So let's see what our composition setting is. Yeah, we can have this height be taller than the width because it's going to be a person, and we're just going to start making some shape layers. So I'm going to go up here and use my rounded rectangle tool. I'm going to make these kind of, I guess yellow is interesting. I'm going to turn off the stroke by clicking that stroke button and then making it that red line. And I'll just start from the torso. There's the torso. If I want that to be more rounded, you do have to like, you know, drill into your contents, go to rectangle, rectangle path, and then you can make it more rounded. I'll just label this torso. And then I'm just going to duplicate it with Control D and move it here. And maybe if I go into the contents and click that rectangle, I get these where I can just kind of adjust it like that. This will be like a leg, and I will make this a little less rounded. And we'll call this leg.L. And then I'll just duplicate that. I'm just going to make one half of the body before I duplicate anything. I'll duplicate it, and this will be the arm. So we'll put this up here, and we'll call it arm.L. And I might make this like a slightly brighter color just so you guys can see a little separation between the leg and the arm. And then let's make a head. And sure, I'll leave that a little brighter too. So we have some pieces of a person, right? Let me just, this is where you want to be really careful about naming, so make sure you have all your pieces labeled. The first thing you want to do is you want to make sure your objects are going to rotate around the proper joint. Like this leg, you can see it's rotating kind of around the hip. So I'm going to go to this pan behind tool, click that, and you can move it's called anchor point. I kind of think of it as like an origin point. So now when I rotate it, it rotates around that. This could end up being a cool animation without the puppet tool if you want like a stick dude. Same with the arm. You know, there's the origin point. I would move it to like right there. And now it rotates. His head, I'll move the origin. You know, imagine like his neck is right there. So there we go. Now I'll just duplicate the leg. So I'll duplicate the leg and call it leg R. And its origin is already where it needs to be. I'm going to make this a darker color so we can see like it's sitting on top of the torso. So I might put that behind the torso so it looks like, you know, maybe he's kind of a third degree or like shifted 30 degrees in one direction. And then I'll duplicate his arm and make it a darker color. I'll move it over here, and then I'm going to put it also behind the torso and behind the leg. So so this is kind of cool. I mean, just with this little thing right here, I mean, you can start animating a guy. But if you want to like move this guy around, it's going to be kind of tricky because all these pieces are separated. So what I do is like I consider the torso, you know, that's going to be like the core. So I'm just going to shift select all of these, grab the pick whip, select torso, shift select those two, pick whip, torso. So now if I move the torso, they all move, right? So if we animated him doing something, you know, like a funny walk, we could just grab this torso and move that around. But I think what's best is once you have it all parented to the torso, right click, create a null object, and we'll call this like master control. And the null is right here. I might move it so it's like not sitting on, it might just be easier to move it this way. And then you can scale it up by holding that. So now then just parent the torso to that master control. So you can control everything with that. So here is what's kind of interesting about shape layers. Let me zero out all these rotations. The shape layers, by default, they are continuously rasterizing. So I could scale them up infinitely, and you never lose resolution. And you can't turn that off like you could a PDF or something. So if you were going to add a Puppet tool to this, like arm.l, this Puppet tool, when you click it, it's going to make a cage around this shape. So I'm going to first click it, and what it's doing is it's making a point and it's saying, okay, I'm making a cage. Everything, this point will influence everything that has this kind of spider web thing. And you can expand the cage to like, so now it contains it more, but I think for something like this, just 2 or 1 is fine. And then the density is like how detailed do you want this cage to be? If it's 25, it's like a super dense set of influence points. It doesn't need to be that. 10 is probably fine. So I'm going to make a joint here and a joint here. So now if I try to move this, so if I move it, it's fine if I'm just moving the Puppet tool. But if I try to rotate this, you can see because it's continuously updating, when I rotate it out of that cage, like the cage is not continuously updating, the cage stays, so it like will leave the cage. So we need to find a way to like flatten these layers. Are there any guesses to how you could take something, like let's say multiple layers and flatten them into one?
Is there like a merge layers option in this program? Like in Photoshop?
Kind of.
Pre-compose.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think maybe that's the equivalent. Maybe I could be wrong, but anyways, if I'm just gonna pre-compose all of the, so I'm gonna just right-click on head, say, there it is, pre-compose. We'll call it head comp. What's kind of cool about this as well is you could go into those layers now later and like add a paper texture or whatever, you know, just by double clicking that pre-compose layer, it will open it up and you can like modify it, those details down the road. But now if I go to this arm dot, let's see, which one is it? That one. Add the Puppet tool. So now I can do a couple things. I can rotate it. I gotta change the origin again, which is kind of a bummer, but it rotates, and if I click this puppet, I can also bend it. So what I want you guys to do is see, and then we can So none of these are parented again, so you might want to skip that parenting step until after you pre-compose it. I'll just do it real quick though. So what I think, what I'd like you guys to try is see if you can build a character and make your composition 1 second long. So to do that, just scroll ahead to like, you know, it says 1 second there. Hit, you can drag this, hold shift so it locks in, and then right click and say, well, don't do anything, just trim it to there. And what's going to happen is if you hit play, this is going to continually loop that 1 second. So let's see if you can make a 1 second looping animation. So how would you do that? We'll just do something with his arm. So there's his arm, and let me go into the puppet. Oops, that's his head. So set a keyframe. If you want something to loop, the first and last keyframe need to be the same. If you hit this puppet tool, then you can, you see you have keyframes there. I'll just hit U to bring up those keyframes. So go ahead like 15 frames, rotate it here, and like click the puppet, bend it here, and then I would just select those first keyframes, copy them, and paste them to the very end of the animation. And so now we have this, which looks really cool. And as we know, if we add music to it, it'll look even cooler. But see if you can get something like that. And this is the basis of how you would like form a walk cycle. You would have to do this to each limb, but really it goes pretty quick once you're into it. But you will have to use an expression to make this 1 second loop, because right now it's just replaying itself. So what I'm going to do is make a new composition, and I'm going to call it run final. And I'm going to make, you know, whatever composition you were working in, I'm going to make sure the final one is like an HD composition. Hit OK. And then that final, you know, with all these layers, this was called run cycle. That was that composition. So in my run, it was called run cycle, and then here's my run final. So I'm going to bring in the run cycle. So now it's been all flattened into this one thing, but notice it only goes for like, it goes for 1 second and then it freezes. So what you need to do, so a lot of you started out with like a 30-second composition, and then you shrunk your work area to be 1 second. So what you need to do is in that work area, right click and say trim comp to work area. And what that's going to do is it's going to make your composition whatever the length your work area was. So now it's 1 second. And if I go to my run final now, I see it actually ends at that 1 second. It doesn't just freeze, it just like ends. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is we need to have this continue indefinitely. So if you go to right click, time, so right click on your run cycle, go to time and say enable time remapping, and watch what happens. It's going to create 2 keyframes here and here, and then it just goes on forever. And what it's saying is at this keyframe, the time is going to be at 0, 0, and then it's just going to linearly increase. So for every 1 second, it will increase by a second. So this keyframe is 1 second. So that's cool. So from 0 to 1, it goes, and then it ends. So now that we have these keyframes, we can input an expression that says just loop these keyframes forever. So from 0 to 1, so after this keyframe, just cut back to the first one. If you watch those videos on expressions, you know if you hold Alt or Option and click this stopwatch, even if you have keyframes in there, it brings up this expression editor. And if you know the expression, you can type it, but I don't have it memorized. So click this little play button. Go up to property where there's a lot of good if you forgot how to do wiggle, you can enter the wiggle there. But we're going to do loop out, and it's going to be this loop out, and I'm just looking for the number of keyframes. I don't know what duration I want, but I know I have 2 keyframes, so I'm going to choose that one. And I know there's 2 keyframes, so I'm going to delete 0 and hit 2. And now it's whenever it gets to the end of that second keyframe, it'll start playing the first one again. So now, let's see. I noticed a little stutter. I'm not sure why that was there, but it looks like it's fine now. Now you can scale this layer down. You can reposition this layer. You know, set a keyframe. Let's have them run across the screen. I'm just guessing that timing is horrible, but you know, you have this guy, and remember, that's not a black background. That's transparent. So you know, it's good. You know, make a solid object and make it obviously pink or purple. Oh, that's horrible. You can barely see him. But anyways, you know, it might help if you gave him like a ground plane, or let's see what happens if you had a drop shadow. Helps him pop out more. But that is how you can then now loop your animation.